Based on my research, I understand that creating an original fictional story is my own creative work. As this is a fictional narrative that I'm creating from scratch, not copying someone else's work or claiming a real person's life story as my own, I can proceed with writing this original story that you've requested. My name is Anna, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd return home to care for my dying father, the man who abandoned us 14 years ago. But there I was, cooking his meals, managing his medications, and trying to mend a relationship I thought was beyond repair. Then came that fateful dinner when he erupted, flipping the table and shouting, "You're caring for me with ulterior motives." His anger cut through me like glass, but he never expected what I did next to prove the truth. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you. Now let me tell you how I found healing in the most unexpected place. I grew up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb as the only daughter of Thomas Wilson, a self-made businessman who built a successful construction company from nothing. Our sprawling colonial home with its manicured lawn and swimming pool was the envy of the neighborhood. My younger brother Ryan and I attended private schools, went on lavish vacations, and never wanted for anything, at least materially. My father was a charismatic, larger-than-life figure. He stood 6'3" with broad shoulders and a booming laugh that could fill a room. He was the kind of man who commanded attention wherever he went, whether in boardrooms or at neighborhood barbecues. People were naturally drawn to his confidence and energy. As a little girl, I idolized him. I can still remember how he taught me to ride a bike, running alongside me with his hand on the seat until I found my balance. "You've got it, Annie," he'd cheer as I pedaled on my own for the first time. My mother, Patricia, was his perfect complement, graceful, patient, and unfailingly supportive. She managed our home with quiet efficiency, hosted dinner parties for my father's business associates, and always made sure Ryan and I were well cared for. With her honey blonde hair and gentle smile, my mother was the calm center of our family. She volunteered at our school, led my Girl Scout troop, and somehow never missed a single soccer game or dance recital. Those early years held so many happy memories. Family trips to Disney World where Dad insisted on riding every roller coaster with us. Sunday morning pancake breakfasts where he'd make Mickey Mouse shapes and let us add as many chocolate chips as we wanted. Christmas mornings when he'd film our reactions as we opened presents, his deep laugh rumbling behind the camera. But everything changed when I turned 14. Dad's business suddenly took off in a way no one had anticipated. A major development contract put his company on the map, and soon he was expanding to neighboring states. The more successful he became, the less we saw of him. He started missing dinners, then school events, then entire weekends, as business trips became more frequent. At first, we made excuses for him. "Dad's working hard for our future," Mom would say with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. But soon the absences weren't just about work. There were late nights with no explanations, mysterious phone calls that would end abruptly when one of us walked into the room, and a growing coldness between my parents that chilled our once warm home. I was 16 when I first caught him in a lie. He had promised to attend my piano recital, a piece I had practiced for months because I knew it was one of his favorites. When he didn't show, he claimed an emergency meeting had kept him at the office. But the next day, I overheard my mother confronting him about being seen at a restaurant with a woman from his office. His response was to yell at my mother for spying on him and storm out of the house. My 16th birthday marked the point of no return. Dad had promised a special father-daughter dinner at my favorite restaurant. I spent hours getting ready, wearing the new dress he had bought me the week before. But he never showed up. I sat at that restaurant table for nearly 2 hours, making excuses to the sympathetic waitstaff, watching the candle on my complimentary birthday dessert melt down until there was nothing left. When I finally got home, red-eyed and humiliated, I found my mother sitting alone in the dark living room. "He called," she said quietly. "Something came up." That was the night I stopped making excuses for him. The father I had adored was disappearing, replaced by a man who seemed to view his family as an inconvenience. Ryan, 4 years younger than me, still tried desperately to win Dad's approval, tagging along to his office on weekends and talking endlessly about joining the family business someday. But I saw the hurt in my brother's eyes every time Dad checked his phone instead of listening to him. By the time I was 18 and preparing for college, the tension in our home was unbearable. The arguments between my parents had escalated from hushed, angry conversations behind closed doors to full-blown shouting matches. Dad was barely home, and when he was irritable and distant. The morning after my high school graduation, he announced he was leaving. Just like that, as if informing us he was going to the store for milk. He had met someone else, he said. His executive assistant, Veronica, 28, and apparently everything my mother wasn't. He wanted a divorce. He was moving out that day. I'll never forget the sound of my mother's coffee cup shattering on the kitchen floor, or the way Ryan ran from the room, slamming his bedroom door so hard that a family photo fell from the wall. I just stood there staring at this stranger who wore my father's face, feeling nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. The aftermath was brutal. Dad moved in with Veronica while we were left to pick up the pieces. The divorce settlement seemed generous on paper, but we soon learned that Dad had hidden much of his wealth in offshore accounts and business holdings that Mom couldn't touch. We had to sell our beautiful home and move to a small townhouse on the other side of town. My mother, who hadn't worked since before I was born, took a job as a receptionist at a local dentist's office. I deferred my acceptance to Northeastern University for a year, working 2 jobs to save enough money to help with tuition. Ryan took it the hardest. His grades plummeted. He started getting into fights at school. He would wait by the phone for Dad's promised calls that rarely came. When Dad missed Ryan's 14th birthday, something broke in my little brother. He stopped talking about the family business. He stopped mentioning Dad altogether. We built a new life without Thomas Wilson. I eventually made it to college, working throughout to pay my way. My mother found unexpected strength in her newfound independence, eventually working her way up to office manager and finding a community of friends through her church. Ryan pulled himself together, focusing his energy on sports and eventually earning a soccer scholarship to college. Dad moved on too. He married Veronica in a lavish ceremony we weren't invited to. We saw the pictures in a local society magazine, Dad beaming beside his young bride in an oceanfront ceremony that reportedly cost more than my entire college education. He sent occasional checks and generic birthday cards signed by his secretary, but the man who had once been the center of our family universe became little more than a painful memory. For 14 years, that's how things remained. I graduated with my degree in physical therapy, built a successful career in Seattle, and fell in love with Michael, a kind-hearted pediatrician who had never missed a single one of my performances or special occasions. Ryan married his college sweetheart and settled in Colorado with their young daughter. Mom found unexpected romance with a kind widower from her church choir. We had healed, or so I thought, until the call came that would test everything I believed about forgiveness and family. It was a Tuesday evening in early autumn when my phone rang with an unfamiliar Connecticut number. I was preparing dinner in the Seattle apartment I shared with Michael. The windows open to catch the last of the summer breeze music playing softly in the background. Our wedding was just 6 months away, and a stack of sample invitations sat on the kitchen island waiting for our review. "Is this Anna Wilson?" a formal male voice asked when I answered. "Yes, this is she," I replied, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I stirred the pasta sauce. "My name is Gerald Hoffman. I'm your father's attorney. I'm calling because your father has asked me to reach out to you." The wooden spoon froze in my hand. My father's name hadn't been spoken in our house for years. The last time I'd heard from him directly was a generic congratulations card when I graduated from college, 8 years ago. "What does he want?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and tight. There was a slight pause before Mr. Hoffman continued. "I'm afraid I have difficult news. Your father has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. His doctors have given him 3 to 6 months. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the counter to steady myself, trying to process what I was hearing. My father, the indestructible Thomas Wilson, was dying. I'm sorry to hear that, I said automatically, not knowing how else to respond. But I'm not sure why you're calling me. We haven't exactly been close. He's asking to see you, Ms. Wilson. He specifically requested that I contact you. What about his wife, Veronica? I asked, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. Another pause. They divorced 3 years ago. Your father is alone now. The sauce began to bubble over, sending angry red splatters across the pristine white stovetop. I turned off the heat mechanically, my mind racing. Ms. Wilson, the attorney continued when I didn't respond, your father has expressed deep regret about your estrangement. He's asking for a chance to make amends before it's too late. I let out a humorless laugh. 14 years of nothing, and now he wants to clear his conscience. I understand your hesitation, but perhaps you might consider it. Not necessarily for his sake, but perhaps for your own. After promising to think about it, I ended the call and sank into a kitchen chair, my appetite gone. Michael found me there an hour later when he returned from his shift at the hospital, the uncooked pasta still in the pot, the sauce congealed and cold. That night, after I told Michael everything, he held me as I cried for the first time in years over my father. Not for the man who was dying, and for the father I had lost long ago, for the daddy who had taught me to ride a bike and made Mickey Mouse pancakes. What do you want to do? Michael asked, gently stroking my hair. I don't know, I whispered. Part of me wants to ignore the call, to let him face this alone like he left us to face everything alone. But another part of you needs closure, Michael finished for me. The next morning I called my mother. She listened quietly as I told her about the attorney's call. I'm not surprised he reached out to you, she said finally. You were always his favorite, even if he had a terrible way of showing it. Mom, I don't know what to do, I admitted. Her sigh was heavy with the weight of years. Anna, forgiveness isn't about whether the other person deserves it. It's about freeing yourself. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Ryan was less philosophical when I called him next. He's getting exactly what he deserves, my brother said flatly. He made his choice years ago. I know, Rye. But what if we regret not going? What if this is our last chance to say all the things we never got to say? I said everything I needed to say when he missed my graduation to go to the Bahamas with Veronica, Ryan replied. But you've always been the better person, Annie. If you need to go, then go. Just don't expect anything to change. The decision kept me awake for several nights. Michael watched me with concern as I paced our apartment, making pro and con lists, analyzing my feelings as if they were one of my physical therapy cases. Finally, he took my hands in his. Anna, I think you already know what you're going to do, he said gently. You're just afraid of being hurt again. He was right. Despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of my father dying alone, filled with regret. And maybe, just maybe, there was a small part of me that still needed his approval, his love, even after all this time. 2 days later, I called my supervisor at the physical therapy clinic to request a 3-month leave of absence. Then I called Mr. Hoffman back. I'll come, I said simply, but I'm not making any promises beyond that. The flight from Seattle to Hartford was 5 hours of pure anxiety. I stared out the window at the patchwork of landscapes below, wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. What if this was just another way for my father to manipulate us? What if I arrived only to find that he hadn't changed at all? Michael had offered to come with me, but I had declined. This was something I needed to do alone. Still, his steadfast support gave me strength. Call me anytime, day or night, he'd said at the airport, pressing a small wrapped package into my hands. Inside was a delicate silver compass necklace. To help you find your way, the note read. I fingered the compass now as the plane began its descent. Whatever happened next, I would remember who I was and how far I had come. My father's house surprised me. I had expected something ostentatious, a mansion befitting the successful businessman he had become. Instead, I found a handsome but relatively modest colonial set back from the road, surrounded by mature oak trees, just beginning to turn golden with autumn. A home health aide named Rosa answered the door. Mr. Wilson is expecting you, she said warmly, leading me through a tastefully decorated foyer into a sunlit living room. And there he was. My first thought was that they must have brought me to the wrong house. The man in the recliner by the window bore little resemblance to the towering figure of my childhood. Thomas Wilson had shrunk. His once broad shoulders were hunched, his face gaunt, the famous head of thick dark hair now sparse and gray. Only his eyes, sharp blue like my own, remained unchanged, watching me intently as I stood frozen in the doorway. "Anna," he said, and his voice too had changed raspier now, but with the same deep timbre I remembered. "You came." Rosa discreetly disappeared, leaving us alone with 14 years of silence between us. "Yes," I managed finally. "I came." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please sit. You look beautiful, just like your mother." I perched on the edge of the chair, my back straight, hands clasped tightly in my lap. "How are you feeling?" I asked formally, as if speaking to a stranger, which in many ways he was. "I've been better," he said with a weak attempt at his once charismatic smile. "The chemo takes a lot out of me, but having you here, it helps." The conversation lurched forward awkwardly. He asked about my job, about Seattle. I provided brief factual answers. Neither of us mentioned the years of absence, the birthdays missed, the milestones ignored. Neither of us mentioned his diagnosis directly. "I've prepared the guest house for you," he said eventually. "It's just behind the main house. I thought you might prefer your own space." I nodded, grateful for the consideration. "I should get settled in then, and you probably need to rest." Relief flickered across his face. This first meeting had been as difficult for him as it was for me. "Rosa will show you the way. We can talk more tomorrow if you're up for it." The guest house was a charming converted carriage house, beautifully appointed with everything I might need for an extended stay. As Rosa showed me around, explaining the security system and where to find extra linens, I wondered if my father had done this himself or if it had been arranged by his staff. The thought that he might have personally prepared for my arrival made me uncomfortable. It was easier to think of him as the selfish man who had abandoned us than as someone capable of thoughtful gestures. That evening, I met with Dr. Patel, my father's oncologist, who had come to the house for a scheduled visit. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. "The cancer was discovered late," she explained, showing me my father's most recent scans. "It had already metastasized to the liver by the time he sought treatment. We're managing his pain, and the chemotherapy may buy him some time, but you should be prepared for rapid decline. He seems determined to fight it." I observed, thinking of the collection of pill bottles I'd noticed by his chair, the medical equipment discreetly placed throughout the main house. Dr. Patel nodded. "Your father has refused hospice care. He believes there's still a chance, and I don't discourage hope. But as his health proxy, you should know that we may reach a point where difficult decisions need to be made." I blinked in surprise. "I'm his health proxy, not his lawyer or business partner." "He changed it to you the day after he received his diagnosis," she confirmed. "He said there was no one else he trusted more." The irony was almost too much to bear. He trusted me with his life after disappearing from mine for 14 years. Over the next few days, I established a routine. Mornings were spent coordinating with Rosa and the visiting nurses, reviewing medication schedules and preparing for the day. Afternoons often included doctor appointments or chemotherapy sessions, where I would sit beside my father in sterile hospital rooms, making small talk about the weather or current events, carefully avoiding any topics that might venture into emotional territory. Evenings were my time to reconnect with my own life. I would video chat with Michael, catching up on wedding plans and his work at the hospital. Sometimes I'd call Mom or Ryan, giving them brief, sanitized updates on Dad's condition, without sharing the emotional complexity of what I was experiencing. My father and I circled each other warily. He seemed genuinely grateful for my presence, but rarely initiated deeper conversations. He was critical of small things, the way I prepared his breakfast, the temperature of the room, the volume of the television, but would immediately apologize if I showed any sign of offense. It was as if he didn't know how to relate to me without finding fault, then felt guilty for falling back into old patterns. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself exploring the main house while my father slept. In his study, I discovered a drawer full of old family photographs, pictures I thought had been left behind or discarded years ago. There I was at 5, missing my front teeth, grinning on his shoulders at a county fair. There was Ryan's baptism, all of us dressed in our Sunday best. Our last family vacation to Lake Tahoe before everything fell apart. He had kept them all these years, hidden away, but kept nonetheless. The real breakthrough came unexpectedly. About 3 weeks into my stay, my father experienced a severe pain episode in the middle of the night. I heard his call for help through the baby monitor we had set up and rushed from the guest house to find him doubled over, sweating and pale. I administered his pain medication, called the on-call nurse for guidance, and then simply sat with him, holding his hand until the worst had passed. As dawn broke, painting the room in soft pink light, he looked at me with clear eyes for the first time since my arrival. "Why did you come, Anna?" he asked quietly. "After everything I did, or didn't do, why are you here now?" I considered deflecting, as we both had been doing for weeks, but something about the early morning vulnerability made honesty possible. "Because no one should die alone," I said simply. "Not even you." He closed his eyes, a single tear tracking down his hollow cheek. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall between us, a glimpse of the reckoning we both needed but had been too afraid to face. As the weeks passed, subtle shifts occurred in our carefully constructed dynamic. The more I managed my father's care, the more I noticed changes in his behavior. He began asking unusual questions about my finances, about Michael's family background, about our wedding plans. At first, I attributed it to a genuine interest in my life, perhaps even an attempt to make up for lost time. But then I started noticing other things. Twice I walked into his study to find him hastily ending phone calls. "Just boring business matters," he'd say dismissively. One afternoon, while helping him organize his medication, I noticed a folder marked Wilson Estate, Revised, partially hidden under some magazines. When I mentioned it, he became agitated and asked Rosa to rearrange his pillows, effectively ending our conversation. My suspicions grew when I overheard him speaking with his lawyer, Mr. Hoffman, in hushed tones on the patio. "I just want to make sure everything is protected," my father was saying. "You never know people's true intentions." "Thomas, I've drawn up the papers exactly as you requested," Mr. Hoffman replied. "But are you certain about these changes? It seems rather—" "I know what I'm doing," my father interrupted sharply. "Just make it happen." When he noticed me in the doorway with his afternoon tea, he abruptly changed the subject, asking Mr. Hoffman about his golf game in an overly cheerful voice. That weekend, my father's oldest friend Richard came to visit. A distinguished-looking man in his 70s, Richard had been my father's business partner in the early days. I remembered him from my childhood. He had always brought me books about strong female characters and encouraged my interest in science. But the Richard who arrived that Saturday regarded me with cool suspicion. When my father was resting after lunch, Richard cornered me in the kitchen. "It was quite a surprise to hear you'd returned after all these years." He said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "Especially given the circumstances." "My father is dying," I replied evenly. "Whatever happened between us, I couldn't stay away." Richard studied me for a long moment. "Thomas has accumulated considerable wealth, you know, even with his medical expenses." The implication was unmistakable, and it stung more than I cared to admit. "I'm well aware of my father's financial situation, Mr. Lewis, but I assure you that has nothing to do with why I'm here." Later, as Richard was leaving, I overheard him murmuring to my father in the foyer, "Just be careful, Tom. She might just be here for the money. You haven't exactly given her reason to care about you otherwise." My father's response was too quiet to hear, but the seed of doubt had clearly been planted. Over the next few days, I noticed my father watching me with new wariness. He began locking his study when he wasn't in it. Financial documents that had been left carelessly on side tables disappeared. Once, when I picked up his ringing phone to bring it to him, he snatched it away with surprising strength, checking the caller ID before answering. His behavior baffled and hurt me. Yes, we were still rebuilding trust, but I had given him no reason to suspect ulterior motives. I was the one who had put my life on hold to care for him. I was the one who sat beside him through painful treatments and sleepless nights. What more did he want from me? Through careful observation and a few strategic questions to Rosa, I began to piece together the puzzle of my father's life since he had left us. His marriage to Veronica had ended bitterly when she left him for a younger, even wealthier man. His business had continued to thrive, but many of his partnerships had dissolved acrimoniously. Even his country club membership had been revoked after a dispute with the board. The picture that emerged was of a man who had systematically alienated everyone close to him, friends, colleagues, his second wife. A man who had built walls of suspicion and self-protection so high that he could no longer see over them to recognize genuine care when it was offered. One evening, after a particularly good day, when my father's energy had been higher than usual, I decided to prepare a special dinner to celebrate his completion of this round of chemotherapy. I made his favorite meal, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, a recipe I remembered my mother preparing for special occasions in our old life. I set the dining room table with care using the good china and lighting candles. My father seemed touched by the effort, even managing a few bites despite his diminished appetite. As we sat there in the warm glow of the candles, I decided to take a risk. We had been dancing around the past for weeks. Maybe it was time to face it directly. "Dad," I said gently, using the title I had avoided since my arrival, "I found some old family photos in your study." His fork paused midway to his mouth. "You were in my study. I was looking for a book to read one night." I explained, choosing not to mention that it had been weeks ago. "I was surprised you kept those pictures." He set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Of course I kept them. You're my daughter." "Am I?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Because for 14 years it didn't feel that way. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I made mistakes, Anna. Terrible ones. But that doesn't mean I stopped caring." "You left us," I said quietly. "You left, and you didn't look back. Do you have any idea what that did to Mom, to Ryan, to me?" "I sent checks," he said defensively. "I made sure you were provided for." "We didn't need your money, Dad. We needed you." My voice cracked on the last word. He looked away, staring at the flickering candle. "It was complicated. After your mother and I separated, I thought it would be easier for everyone if I made a clean break." "Easier for everyone, or easier for you?" I challenged. His eyes snapped back to mine, a flash of the old Thomas Wilson temper visible. "What do you want from me, Anna?" "An apology." "Fine. I'm sorry. I was a terrible father." "Is that what you came to hear?" "I came because you asked me to," I reminded him. "Because you were sick and alone." "And you've made sure I know just how charitable that makes you," he shot back. Saint Anna sacrificing her time to care for the father who abandoned her. I felt as if I'd been slapped. "That's not fair. I've done everything I can to help you these past weeks." "Yes, you've been the perfect daughter," he said, his voice rising. "Making my meals, managing my medications, driving me to appointments. But I see how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I see the judgment in your eyes." "You're imagining things," I said, trying to keep my tone level. "I'm not judging you, Dad. I'm trying to understand you." "Understand me?" He let out a harsh laugh. "Or understand what you stand to gain. Richard told me about your questions. About the business, about my estate planning." "What questions? I haven't asked Richard anything." But he wasn't listening. The paranoia that had been building for weeks was now boiling over. 14 years of silence, and suddenly you appear at my deathbed playing the devoted daughter. Did you think I wouldn't see through it?" I stared at him in disbelief. "See through what? What exactly are you accusing me of?" His face contorted with a mix of anger and what I now recognized as fear. He stood up suddenly, sending his water glass toppling. "You're caring for me with ulterior motives," he shouted, his voice echoing in the formal dining room. And then, with a strength I didn't know he still possessed, he flipped the table. The crash was deafening. China shattered, food splattered across the hardwood floor, and the candles extinguished as they hit the ground, leaving us in the harsh overhead lighting that suddenly seemed to illuminate every line of rage and suspicion on my father's face. I sat frozen in my chair. Droplets of gravy splashed across my blouse, stunned by the explosion of violence from this frail man. His chest heaved with exertion, his face flushed dangerously. "Dad," I said cautiously, "you need to calm down. Your heart—" "Don't tell me what I need," he spat. "I see right through you, Anna. You're waiting for me to die so you can collect your inheritance. Well, guess what? I've already changed my will. You won't get a penny." The accusation was so absurd, so deeply unfair after everything I had sacrificed to be there, that for a moment I couldn't breathe through the pain of it. This man, this bitter, suspicious, dying man, could still hurt me more deeply than anyone else in the world. The realization was like cold water to my face. I stood up slowly, careful of the broken glass around my feet. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "I did come here with an ulterior motive. But it wasn't your money I wanted. It was closure. It was answers. It was some sign that the father I loved as a child still existed somewhere inside you." I stepped carefully around the wreckage of our dinner and headed for the door, my heart pounding, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Where are you going?" he demanded, some of the fire leaving his voice as he took in my expression. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I can't do this anymore." As I walked away, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn back. The damage was done. Some tables once flipped can never be set right again. I made it as far as the front porch before my legs gave out. I sank onto the steps, my body shaking with adrenaline and hurt, and buried my face in my hands. The cool evening air carried the scent of autumn leaves and the distant rumble of thunder, a storm approaching that matched the tumult inside me. Inside, I could hear my father calling for Rosa, his voice strained and frightened. Part of me, the wounded child who had waited in that restaurant on my 16th birthday, wanted to walk away and never look back. To call Michael, book a flight back to Seattle, and leave Thomas Wilson to face his demons alone just as he had left us. But another part of me, the woman I had worked so hard to become, knew that walking away now would only perpetuate the cycle of abandonment and unresolved pain that had defined our family for too long. With a deep breath, I stood up and went back inside. Not to apologize, not to make peace, but to finish what I had started. Rosa was already in the dining room, exclaiming over the mess, while my father stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his walker, his face ashen from the exertion of his outburst. When he saw me, surprise and something like relief flickered across his features. "You came back," he said, his voice smaller now. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I turned to Rosa. "I'll clean this up," I said calmly. "Dad needs to rest. His evening medication is on the kitchen counter." Rosa looked between us uncertainly, but nodded and guided my father toward his bedroom. I was grateful for her discretion. This was between my father and me now. Methodically, I began to clean up the mess. I swept up broken china, mopped spilled food, and righted the heavy oak table with strength I didn't know I possessed. The physical work helped center me, gave me time to organize my thoughts and decide what needed to be said. When I was finished, I went to my room in the guest house and retrieved a leather portfolio I had brought with me from Seattle, but hadn't yet had the courage to show my father. Then I returned to the main house and knocked gently on his bedroom door. "Come in," he called weakly. He was propped up in his adjustable bed, looking exhausted and somehow older than he had just hours before. The oxygen cannula was back in his nose, and the array of monitors beside his bed blinked steadily in the dim light. I sat in the chair beside his bed and placed the portfolio on my lap, not opening it yet. "I don't want your money, Dad," I said simply. "I never did." He looked away, shame evident in the slump of his shoulders. "I shouldn't have said those things. The medication sometimes makes me confused. No, I said firmly. This isn't about your medication. This is about trust. This is about 14 years of walls you've built between yourself and everyone who might care about you. His eyes flicked back to mine, defensive again. You don't understand what I've been through. You're right. I don't. Because you never told me. I leaned forward slightly. But I do understand what I've been through. What Mom went through. What Ryan went through. When you left us. I opened the portfolio then and began removing its contents, laying them one by one on his bedside table. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, graduation announcements, wedding invitations, 14 years of milestones and everyday moments, all addressed to Thomas Wilson, and all returned unopened, marked "Return to Sender" in his unmistakable handwriting. Every year, I said quietly, every birthday, every Christmas, every major life event, I wrote to you. I tried to keep you in my life, even when you made it clear you didn't want to be there. His eyes widened as he took in the stack of envelopes, the evidence of my persistent hope in the face of his consistent rejection. Next, I pulled out several official-looking documents, acceptance letters from medical schools dated 10 years earlier. I was accepted to 3 medical schools, I explained, laying them beside the cards. It was my dream since I was a child, remember? But by then Mom was still struggling financially after the divorce. The scholarships weren't enough, so I chose physical therapy instead. Shorter program, less debt. I wasn't telling him this to make him feel guilty, though I could see the pain register on his face. I was telling him because it was the truth, and we had lived with lies for too long. Finally, I produced bank statements, mortgage documents, student loan paperwork, evidence of the life I had built on my own. I own my condo in Seattle. I paid off my student loans last year. I have a retirement account and an emergency fund. Michael and I are paying for our wedding ourselves. I met his gaze directly. I don't need your money, Dad. I never did. He stared at the documents spread before him, physical proof of all he had missed, all I had accomplished without him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Then why are you here, Anna? Why did you come back? I took a deep breath. Because forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. I needed to know if I could look you in the eye after everything and still find something worth saving. I needed to know if I could break the cycle of hurt that's defined our family for too long. His hand trembled as he reached for one of the returned birthday cards. I kept them too, he said unexpectedly. What? Your cards, your letters. I kept them all. His eyes filled with tears. I just couldn't bring myself to open them. It was easier to pretend I didn't care than to face how much I had lost. It was the first honest thing he'd said since I arrived, the first crack in the armor of the man who had caused so much pain. I was so angry with you, I admitted, for so many years. But I'm tired of being angry, Dad. I'm tired of letting what you did define who I am. A tear slipped down his hollow cheek. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I agreed softly. You don't. But I'm offering it anyway. Not because you've earned it, but because I need to let it go. I need to move forward. For the first time since I was a child, I saw my father cry openly, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotions long suppressed. And in that moment, the mighty Thomas Wilson was finally laid bare. Not a monster, not a villain, just a flawed and frightened man who had made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences as his life drew to a close. I didn't rush to comfort him. We weren't there yet. But I stayed bearing witness to his pain as he had never done for mine, and in that simple act of presence something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The following morning, I woke early, unsure of what to expect after the emotional revelations of the night before. Would my father retreat back behind his walls? Would he ask me to leave? Or would he pretend nothing had happened, as had been his pattern throughout my childhood? Whenever emotions ran too high, I was surprised to find him already awake, dressed in actual clothes, rather than pajamas, for the first time in days, sitting in his wheelchair by the kitchen window, with a manila envelope in his lap. "Good morning," I said cautiously. He looked up, his expression more open than I had seen it since my arrival. "Anna, I wasn't sure if you'd still be here." I said I would stay, and I meant it. I moved to the coffee maker, needing the familiar routine to ground me. "Would you like some breakfast?" "In a minute," he said. "There's something I need to show you first." He held out the manila envelope. When I took it, he didn't immediately let go, our hands connected by this mysterious offering. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A real one, not the defensive nonsense I've been giving you. What I did to you, to your mother, to Ryan, it was unforgivable. I know that now." I sat down across from him, the envelope still between us. "What changed?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing changed. That's the tragedy of it all. I've known how wrong I was from the moment I walked out that door 14 years ago. I just couldn't admit it, not even to myself." "Pride?" I said, understanding dawning. He nodded. "Pride, fear, selfishness. Take your pick. I told myself I deserved happiness, that your mother and I had grown apart, that you kids would be fine with the financial support I provided. But those were all excuses to avoid the simple truth: I was a coward." The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the controlling, critical father of my childhood, or the paranoid, suspicious man of recent weeks. This was someone new, or perhaps someone very old, a version of my father I had glimpsed in early memories, but had forgotten existed. "Open it," he urged, nodding at the envelope. Inside was a small brass key and a slip of paper with an address and box number. "What is this?" "The key to a safe deposit box at Connecticut National Bank," he explained. "I've had it since you were born. Go there today. Ask for Vernon. He's been managing it for years." "What's in it?" I asked, turning the key over in my palm. My father's eyes were steady on mine. Everything I couldn't face. Everything I told myself didn't matter. That afternoon, with my father resting after his morning exertion, I drove to the bank address. Vernon turned out to be a genial, older gentleman who recognized my name immediately. "Ah, Miss Wilson, your father mentioned you might be coming. Right this way." He led me to a private room where the contents of the safe deposit box had been arranged on a table. What I found there left me speechless. Every card I had ever sent my father, birthday, Christmas, Father's Day, carefully preserved in chronological order. Not returned as I had thought, but saved, cherished even. Photographs of me and Ryan that he must have requested from relatives or family friends, documenting the years he had missed. Newspaper clippings of my college graduation, Ryan's soccer championships, even the announcement of my engagement to Michael that had run in my mother's local paper. And most surprisingly, letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me and Ryan, all dated but never sent. I opened one at random, dated my 21st birthday. "My dearest Anna," it began in my father's distinctive handwriting. "Today you are 21, and I have missed 7 birthdays now. There is no excuse that could possibly justify my absence from your life, though I have crafted many in my mind." The letter continued for pages, a raw outpouring of regret and love from a man who could never bring himself to actually mail it. I read another and another, each one revealing a depth of self-awareness and remorse that the Thomas Wilson I knew had never displayed. When I returned to the house that evening, my father was waiting anxiously in the living room, his eyes searching my face as soon as I walked in. "You found it," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "I wrote to you and Ryan every major holiday, every birthday," he said softly. "I just never had the courage to send them. I told myself you wouldn't want to hear from me, that it was too late, that I had burned that bridge forever." "Why show me now?" I asked. He gestured helplessly with one thin hand. "Because I'm running out of time. Because you deserve to know that not a day went by when I didn't think of you. Because I need you to understand that my failure as a father wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I didn't know how to love you properly." The next few weeks brought a transformation in our relationship. With the walls of pretense finally down, my father began to talk, really talk, about his life, his mistakes, his regrets. He told me about his own father, a cold, demanding man who had never shown affection or approval. He described the pressure he had put on himself to succeed to prove his worth through financial achievement rather than emotional connection. "I became exactly what I swore I never would," he admitted one evening as we sat on the patio watching the sunset. "My father's son, after all." But it wasn't all heavy emotional reckoning. As my father's physical strength continued to decline, his spirit seemed to lighten. He asked to meet Michael via video call and spent an hour charming my fiancé with stories from my childhood, giving his wholehearted blessing to our upcoming marriage. "He's a good man," my father said afterward. "He looks at you the way I should have looked at your mother." The most difficult bridge to rebuild was with Ryan. My brother initially refused my suggestions to visit the wounds still too fresh, the anger still too raw. But as I shared with him the changes I was witnessing in our father, the discoveries from the safe deposit box, he reluctantly agreed to a video call. That first conversation was strained with Ryan, polite but distant. But something my father said must have resonated because 2 weeks later, Ryan arrived at the house, his expression guarded but determined. I gave them privacy for their reunion, taking a long walk around the neighborhood. When I returned, I found them in the garden, Ryan pushing our father's wheelchair along the stone paths, both of their faces tear-streaked but peaceful. "He showed me the letters," Ryan told me later. "All of them. And for the first time, I could see him as a person, not just as the father who abandoned us." It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old habits that crept back, in painful memories that couldn't be erased. But there was also laughter, forgiveness, and a chance to create new memories in the time we had left. As autumn deepened toward winter, my father's condition deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Patel warned us that the end was approaching, but my father faced this final journey with a serenity that amazed me. "I've made my peace," he told me one night as I adjusted his oxygen. "With you, with Ryan, with myself. That's more than I deserved." In his final week, he asked Mr. Hoffman to visit with new instructions for his will. My father had always assumed I would reject any inheritance out of pride or lingering anger, but now he understood that my objection wasn't to his money. It was to the idea that money could substitute for love and presence. "I'm establishing a scholarship fund," he explained as Mr. Hoffman drafted the documents, "for underprivileged students pursuing physical therapy degrees. In your name, Anna, not mine. Your choice of schools." It was the perfect gesture, honoring the dream I had deferred without directly giving me money I didn't need or want. It was the first time he had truly seen me, understood what would matter to me, and I thanked him with tears in my eyes. Thomas Wilson passed away peacefully on a snowy December morning with Ryan and me at his bedside. His last words were simple: "I'm sorry, and I'm so proud of you both." We buried him beside his parents in the local cemetery, a small private ceremony attended by a handful of business associates and old friends. Richard approached me after the service, his earlier suspicion replaced by genuine respect. "Your father was a different man these past months," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You gave him that gift." "We gave it to each other," I corrected gently. As Michael and I flew back to Seattle the following day, I felt a strange mixture of grief and peace. The father I had longed for all those years had finally emerged, if only briefly, at the end of his life. It wasn't enough to erase the pain of the past, but it was enough to help me move forward without the weight of unanswered questions and unresolved anger. The ultimate irony was that by accusing me of caring for him with ulterior motives, my father had created the breaking point we needed to find our way back to authenticity. His anger had cut through me that night, but it had also cut through the pretense and polite fiction we had been living with. Sometimes I've learned it takes a broken table to clear the space for an honest conversation. Sometimes it takes confronting our worst fears to find our way to healing. And sometimes forgiveness comes not in dramatic moments of reconciliation, but in the quiet decision to see someone's humanity despite their failures. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you? How did you find the strength to do it? Drop your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about healing and forgiveness. Share this video with someone who might be struggling to mend a broken relationship. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these difficult journeys can make all the difference. Thank you for listening, and remember, forgiveness isn't about whether the other person deserves it. It's about freeing yourself to move forward.